Hi there, peace be upon you. Welcome to Rational Religion, where we make sense of spirituality.
This is our new talk show. It's called Believe You Me. And don't worry, the animated videos haven't gone anywhere.
Now, you may have noticed we've changed our name from End of Atheism to Rational Religion. So apparently End of Atheism was too divisive.
Who would have thought?
Crazy. So, if you like today's show and you want more dialogue and debate around the existence of God and atheism, then subscribe below.
Subscribe below. Subscribe below.
How do you actually intend to offer debate? Both of you are Muslims, so unless you are going to debate the internal perspective of Islam or use direct sources from people you disagree with in their entire context, you are heading for a world of pain. I hope this isn't going to be one of those silly ego jerks like with the Islamic Education and Research Academy, where you assert your opponent's position and thought processes without actual basis. But I don't hold my breath, as I remember you crying about how Stephen Fry was a militant atheist for daring to answer the hypothetical, what would you say to God were you to die and find out said God actually existed? So I also find your face pulling around the idea that the name End of Atheism was a poor name, rather comical, but not for the reasons you intended. It was a poor name as you lacked any such ability to end so-called atheism.
So what do we have for today's show? We are discussing, I'm going to answer my own question, we are discussing atheism, funnily enough. More specifically, why it's here, where it's come from, and where it's going.
Yeah.
Let's get started. Atheism. Why is it so prevalent?
Well, I think it's prevalent because we have to understand what atheism is in the first place before we actually answer that question.
Yeah.
And atheism at its fundamental root is the belief that when somebody says that God has spoken to me, God has communicated with me, that they're one of two things. They're a liar or they're deluded.
Right.
They can only be those two things if you believe that they're not telling the truth.
Is that not a bit harsh to
No.
atheist people who don't necessarily go around thinking, oh, that guy's a liar, deluded, liar, deluded?
Well, no. Is
that what you're saying?
It's a subconscious thought process, and it's born out of the fact and the failing of religious people, actually.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is religion has, in a way, degenerated in many respects. And it's degenerated because it's forsaken the idea that God can communicate with human beings. The Prophet Muḥammad, peace be upon him, the Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, Buddha, Krishna, Socrates, Moses, peace be upon them all, they were all people who claimed that God spoke to them. Yeah. And among their followers were people who claimed also that God spoke to them as well.
Yeah.
And the loss of that communication, that two-way communication with God, means that fundamentally faith has taken on a meaning nowadays, which is basically an airy-fairy kind of belief in something. You don't really have any evidence for it like you have inferential evidence for it. You don't actually have any, direct experience of it. And whatever direct experience you have of it can also be put down to kind of your emotional state at the time. And psychological phenomena. And it basically means that belief in the existence of God is something that can only be verified after death.
Right.
This has to be one of the most convoluted introductions to being an atheist that I have ever experienced. Atheism, if you wish to call it that, is simply the absence of belief in a deity or deities. Now, as a term, this is only really useful in a reality where theists exist, but that's simply pragmatics. As for what you present as the supposed reason for the decline in religion, this is utterly false. For a start, you dishonestly list people such as Buddha, who never claimed to speak to any deity, which is why most forms of Buddhism are atheistic, not to mention you listed Krishna, who is a prominent deity in Hinduism. But then you also ignore the vast range of religions which lack any form of divine commandment or fully anthropomorphized spirits, such as numerous forms of deism or totemism. Not to mention that the belief in a personal deity is wider spread than ever. Egocentric religion has grown, not shrunk. More people than ever claim to talk to God and to know what said God personally thinks. So not only do you fail in presenting the big picture, but the very basics of your point are a ghastly testament to your personal ignorance on the topic. But you also laid it out in such a way that makes the atheist look aggressive, because we note that your position is unsubstantiated, as if the conclusions wrought from that about you are the atheist's fault and not the fault of your inability. But why is non-belief on the rise? Well, it's a bit of a 1-2 punch. easier access to better education, and the reduction of punishment inflicted upon the non-believers seem to be two of the main factors responsible for the rise of secular atheists. It has nothing to do with people not being taught about some mythical telephone connection to some deity. And that is not only demonstrated by the earlier noting of religions which lack said element, but also the fact that we, the atheists, know about said idea and not simply from George Carlin sketches making light of it. Many of us were raised religious and then left when realization as to the lack of evidence kicked in. But there's another question brewing behind all of this. Why does your God need the believers to introduce them to the non-believers? Is God a vampire? He can only enter once invited. This seems like silly schoolyard logic surrounding a playground crush and not the actions of some divine deity. Who taught the first believer to believe if this teaching is necessary, and why aren't we all born as such? A human leader may only be as good as those in their command, and vice versa, as it is a reciprocal relationship, but not some all-powerful deity. You see, theism has always been airy-fairy, lacking in the evidence department completely throughout history.
You're saying that that's what's been recorded in the books. Looking from our present-day viewpoint, back in history, that's what's in the Bible. It's in the it's taught in the Qur'an, and it's recorded in the early history of Islam, and it's all in many of the different world religions.
Absolutely.
It continued in the Native American religion, in the Australian Aboriginal
dreams
traditions.
and the importance of true dreams and things like that.
So you're basically saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that actually religions themselves have shut the gate of revelation
and therefore of evidence.
Right, of direct experiential evidence.
Exactly. And
how have they done that? Just talk about that for a moment.
Well, I would say that fundamentally they've done that because they've strayed away from the true teachings of the religion. They've rejected people who have come from God often, as is the case, and in doing so, God has stopped speaking to them. And therefore what they've done is they've said, well, God has stopped speaking to us, or communicating with us, so obviously God doesn't speak anymore. It was a failure on their part in their relationship with God, on account of which God stopped communicating with them on a regular basis.
So you're saying this was a key feature and a common feature of religion in the past, and it's now died out.
Of every religion at their origin, but all religions over time undergo a process of degeneration, unless they are maintained by God through messengers, through regeneration. Yes, and the reason therefore atheism has grown is because alongside this degeneration, and alongside this loss of belief of the importance of evidence, even in respect of religious belief, you've had the growth of the importance of evidence in the scientific and the material sphere.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And so as people like Newton and Thomas Jefferson were very rationalistic individuals and very deeply religious individuals, they rejected concepts which they found to be irrational in their religious beliefs. So Newton was famously a Unitarian, rejected the idea of the Trinity.
Jefferson had the Jefferson Bible, where he essentially said, I don't believe all this miraculous stuff, I'm going to make a naturalistic explanation or a naturalistic account of Jesus' life. As they actually became more rationalistic with the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, as they began to rely on reason more and more, they began to see that actually there are elements of their traditional faith, at the time it was Christianity, which weren't so reconcilable with reason.
So Trinity, original sin, the basis of the belief in the entire religion and the concept of atonement on the resurrection, which was an unwitnessed event.
And an exceptional event. It's not something
that's common, is it?
And Trinity, I mean, with all respect to our Christian views, it does defy the basic laws of arithmetic.
Exactly.
So when you have the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, and you begin to rely on reason, you can't throw those kind of things out for a faith tradition which is no longer verified by personal experience.
Absolutely. And so what happens is, fundamentally, you have a dichotomy of approaches towards seeking truth.
Yeah.
And one prevailed over the other. And the reason science continues to prevail over such religions that decry and put aside any kind of personal, actual, objective evidence of God, because religions came to rely on the basis of their evidence was all inferential. Look at the nature and the beauty of the designer's work and the creation, and so on and so forth. It was inferential from the evidence of God's work to that God should exist. And whereas science was the observation of an actual result, and you're seeing that something actually produced a particular result directly, that was a higher stage of evidence. And because religion had lost that stage of evidence, which was of direct experience of God,
Yeah.
it naturally meant that science trumped it in every kind of sphere.
So not only are you happy to lie about other religions which never had prophets of any kind, but now you're going to lie about the philosophy of evidence and science. The phrase
Personal, actual, objective evidence of God.
is an oxymoron. If it is personal to the individual, that is the very definition of subjective. Objective would be demonstrable and consistent. Voices in your head are neither. So religion never really had any evidence, therefore you are speaking a half-truth here. You are correct in how advancements in philosophy and science have crippled religion, a process sped up by better access to education and the removal of punishments for non-believers, yet you wish to reinvent this idea that this is somehow wrong of philosophy and science because they killed any faulty basis for your irrational beliefs. That is only the fault of your beliefs to begin with in failing to withstand examination. If someone says dipping half a potato in a glass of water next to you as you sleep is a test for diabetes in that if it magically disappears, you have said diabetes, but in the morning it is still there, that is not actual evidence that you don't have diabetes. And it certainly is not evidence that the positive results from an actual oral glucose tolerance test are false because the potato was still there. You never had any evidence to lose in the first place.
And let's tease that out a little. What you're essentially saying is, I guess, off the back of a beautiful example, which Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him, is the founder of the Ahmadiyya community, the community of Muslims to which we belong.
Yeah.
It's an example he gave of the different levels of certainty you can have regarding something. So, for instance, if you see smoke rising in a fire, you infer that there's a fire there. And that may be a very, very sound inference, but it's not the same as going to the forest and seeing the fire with your own eyes.
Yeah. And
even seeing the fire is not the same as sticking your hand in it.
Yeah.
And entering the fire
and then experiencing it.
And then you experience it. And from if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is that religion in the modern age, or traditional religion, has stopped at the level of inference.
Of it's seeing smoke and inferring the fire, yeah. And it doesn't go to sight and it doesn't go to experience.
Because essentially what you're saying is when the object is God, you're only seeing God's handiwork.
Yes.
And the arguments for the existence of God become wholly things like the design argument, the causality argument,
yeah.
which, while we believe they're completely sound and we argue for them in our other videos and will continue to do so, fundamentally they are not things which give the heart true certainty regarding God, because there's always this veil in between you and God.
Absolutely.
Whereas actually what you're saying is that what belief in God has been recorded in past scriptures has been at the certainty of sight and even the certainty of experience, where you begin to interact with God's attributes and God himself directly, where you speak to God and he speaks back.
Yeah.
And that's actually, that's recorded in religion as not being something which happens like that, which is a common mistake atheists make.
They're like, oh, where's God? Come on.
Yeah.
Come on, God. Come on, God.
Now.
Hit me with lightning. Now.
But obviously, if God was like that, there'd be no merit in actually believing God. There's no merit in
Absolutely.
believing in the sun. There's no merit in believing in the moon.
Because they're obvious phenomena.
Yeah.
I can demonstrate the effects of fire, bring it to you and show you it in a way that can be replicated so your analogy falls apart on this basis alone. Why? There is no real way of demonstrating the validity of your claims of divine interaction above the countless conflicting narratives which are given by people from other religions. What's more is that many non-believers were once believers who have picked up on the actual source of this supposed connection to God as merely their own conscience in life. That's why God almost always seems to agree with what the believer is asserting, even if two believers of the same God completely disagree. Both assert that they have a connection to God directly, which they argue gives them the final word, leading to countless schisms and divisions in every religion, including Islam, which not only has Shia and Sunni, but within each has numerous schools of faith and factions. I would call them Sunni schools of thought, but I believe that would be a little too generous when it comes to their disagreement on such atrocities as female genital mutilation. The total range of their official responses on the topic going from obligatory down to optional.
And we see this not just with the great prophets of God, we see this with the common people in their religious scriptures. You know, the people, for example, the two people who were in the prison with Joseph, who were criminals, and who God had told them, God had told one of them that he was going to be executed, and he told the other one, you're going to be freed. And Joseph interpreted their dreams for him. And then also among what would be considered as the ordinary people, the mother of Moses. She was told by God, she was not an ordinary woman by any stretch of the imagination, of the mother of a prophet, but she was one of the people. And she was told by God, put your child in a basket in the river. Now, you have to understand what degree of certainty she had about her interaction with God, that it was actually God, for her to actually go through with that.
Actually, what you have is a story about a man whom there is no historical evidence ever existed, let alone the tale surrounding their infancy. I can say with the nearest certainty that the plagues never happened, and neither did the wandering about the desert for 40 years, as those events and that many people tend to leave evidence, a fact which actual historical accounts contradict entirely. But even if there had been a Moses, and even if the mother had placed them in a basket on a river, and if by some chance they were found, so what? Religion, especially yours, can have such an effect on people that they will beat, rape, and murder their own child because they think that is what your God wants. Are they also certain of this connection to your God? Surely it's far harder to make a person kill their child than it is to do everything to save them, thrusting the case of honor killings ahead of the story of Moses in supposed clear connection to God. So maybe think about your arguments and how they can come back to bite you before you make them.
Also, we have the example of Pontius Pilate's wife in the New Testament.
Yes.
Where she has a dream and she says, I've suffered greatly on account of this man Jesus, so have nothing to do with him. She tells Pontius Pilate this. And at this, he becomes very agitated and tries to...
She says, he's true, he's a true man, but he's innocent, don't go through with it.
And he says, I wash my hands
of
this whole issue. So actually what we're seeing in past scriptures is this abundance of revelation and of direct interaction with God, which seems to simply be that in the common day. Fables and tales in books.
Absolutely.
And which you can't verify directly. And I think this is actually what religion would need in order to have a rejuvenation in the modern age. You need a religion which actually institutes for ordinary people who try and follow the spiritual path which that religion preaches to have direct interaction with God.
Yes.
Now, that obviously never comes overnight, but you should start to get glimpses of it.
And
they should start to accelerate more and more
as you make greater effort and greater success in following that
exactly
religion.
And it becomes to a point where you can no longer pass up for instance answers to prayers as coincidences, because no coincidences happen that often. You see interaction with God in your daily life such that prayer is something you can actually depend on as one of your means in your life for things to happen, for good and wholesome things to happen, where you have true dreams, visions, revelations which are so wise, prophetic and clear that you cannot pass them up as being whispers of your psyche.
Absolutely.
And that's the level which religion in the past has always said that it can get you to. And I think...
At their origin.
Yeah, that's what I mean. When the prophet came with them, that's what the followers of that prophet had, and the prophet obviously had.
And that's why they were willing to die for it, because it wasn't a matter of faith, it was a matter of knowledge.
Yeah.
Actually, it was a matter of conquest, of slaughter, rape and pillaging. What next? The Nazis were also God's chosen people because they were willing to die conquering most of Europe? This absurd narrative you have constructed really falls apart upon the most basic of inspection. There is no truth to any of these stories, so how you can use them as evidence for the validity of your personal ignorance is beyond me. This really is just the same old rubbish spread by Iyera. Most recently Imran Hussein, who attempted to define what he called signs as superior to actual demonstrable evidence. The reality, meanwhile, is that this will not work. It may allow the willfully ignorant to cling to their beliefs a while longer, but ultimately lacks any substance to actually draw others to your religion, and thus will not halt religious decline. If anything, it will only actually speed it up.
So I think a religion which had that quality now would actually be the answer to atheism. And I mean, I think for us that's actually from our background as Ahmadi Muslims, that's what we preach, but obviously we'll go into that in future episodes, and that's something for every person to experience and discover and explore for themselves. Okay, so we've talked about why atheism has grown. What are the effects of atheism in the modern day, specifically in the last century or so?
Well, seeing as we're about halfway through your video and you're about to go on to another question, perhaps we shall end this video here and pick up from where we left off later. Either way, you certainly have a lot to do in actually presenting anything close to a reasoned and thought out position, as so far it has been a total disaster. There are a few things which I'd just like to add here at the end of this video. The first is a massive thank you to everyone who has ever donated to me via Patreon. Your fantastic support has given me the ability to keep this channel going, and I hope to continue producing content in the years to come. Secondly, I would like to thank anyone who has ever interacted with this channel. Your shares, likes and dislikes, as well as your comments of both approval and disapproval, have ensured constant feedback, allowing me to improve my work. Last of all, I would like to express my desire that you treat any of the people displayed throughout the video with respect. Whilst it is true that ideas do not demand respect, and there are many in fact which deserve reprehension, we must be careful on how we tackle said ideas in ensuring we are not simply targeting the person. In short, be the compassionate side of reason. So take care, and I'll see you next time.